Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Lynn Krasker-Schultz, and I'm the Director of Programming at the Vilna Show. Be partnering with the Jewish Community Center of the North Shore for this incredible program, and I very much look forward to both what Mimi and Allison have to say. For those of you that don't know about the Vilna, we are a Jewish cultural institution located in historic Beacon Hill in downtown Boston. Of the over 20 synagogues that once existed in the year 1900, the Vilna is the last building that still stands from that era. Today, we don't exist as a synagogue. We are non-denominational. We instead operate more like a JCC without the gym, or the 92nd Street Y in New York. We have lots and lots of cultural programs, some religious, some spiritual, some fun, all from a Jewish perspective. So once the world returns to normal and we are post-COVID and post-pandemic, we welcome you into our doors to experience a mixture of old and a mixture of new. We recently went under a $4 million renovation. And so we are embracing the 21st century with incredible new upgrades. And we look forward to engaging you in person when the time is right. Until then, we ask that you check out our website, vilnashow.org, and join us for some of our other incredible programs. We have a US premiere of a documentary this Sunday, November 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that features the Grand Synagogue excavation and archaeological dig in Vilnius. Check it out on our website. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my friend and companion, Diane Knopf. We are thrilled to be partnering with the JCC again. And Diane, I'm handing it off to you.
And welcome everybody to the 6th JCCNS Jewish Book Month event of our 2020 season. I'm Diane Knopf, the chair of the JCC's speaker series, and I'm so grateful to you for attending virtually. We're so pleased to be partnering with the Vilna Shul for this event. A little bit about us. The Jewish Community Center of the North Shore welcomes everyone from across the North Shore. The J offers enriching programs and services for everyone from preschool, fitness center, summer camps, cultural programs, travel, and more, and is committed to being the central gathering place for learning and culture on the North Shore. Although the JCC was forced to close last March due to the pandemic, it quickly pivoted to provide fitness classes, preschool enrichment, and adult programs virtually to all our community members, and continues to do so, even now that the center has reopened, as illustrated by this wonderful Jewish Book Month speaker series. I'm also proud to tell you that this is our 26th year of bringing a vibrant and diverse array of new and established authors and topics to our community. This year's Jewish Book Month speaker series has something for everyone. So please join us for the remaining events happening throughout November. We're very grateful to all our sponsors who help make this possible, and especially to cultural benefactors Sharon and Howard Rich. I also want to thank our dedicated Jewish Book Month committee, JCC staff, including Sarah Ewing, Stephanie Greenfield, Karen Robinson, and certainly others. This would not be possible without all your efforts. I'm really missing seeing you all in person and getting to schmooze, but I'm grateful for this technology that helps bring us together, and that's our silver lining. So before we begin tonight, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen anytime during the event, and Mimi Lemay and Allison Brooks will be answering your questions after their talk. So let's begin. Mimi Lemay is an international advocate for transgender youth and the author of the viral essay, A Letter to My Son Jacob on His 5th Birthday. Lemay and her family meet regularly with legislators, business leaders, educators, and clergy to share their vision of a more equitable world. She is a member of the Parents for Transgender Equality National Council at Human Rights Campaign. Mimi holds a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and she was recently named one of the Commonwealth Heroines of 2020 by the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. Dr. Allison Rosalie Brooks was raised in London, England, in a modern Orthodox Jewish family who were themselves rather conflicted about the gender disparities inherent in Judaism. Allison has been a physician at Mass General Hospital in Boston for over 17 years, and in 2019 was awarded both the Massachusetts Medical Society Community Clinician of the Year and the Massachusetts General Hospital Community Service Award. She is also a delegate of the Mass Medical Society. Outside of medicine, she has spent 20 years advocating, fundraising, and hosting cultural events to raise awareness and money for the homeless in Lynn. The second of her two children subsequently came out as transgender at the age of 19, and, Allison reports, is now happily married, a blacksmith, and a new mother. And so, without any further ado, it's my great pleasure now to introduce Mimi Lemay and Allison Brooks.
Is Mimi there? Hello, Mimi. Hi. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for being here with me and Mimi Lemay. Mimi's the author of What We Will Become, a wonderful book that has touched me very deeply. In fact, at times I've almost wondered if Mimi wrote it specially for me, even though we've never met. But I do know you aroused emotions and reflections that I thought I'd buried long ago. But I would like to say that I think that everybody here joining us tonight is going to relate to the struggle of living authentically and inventing and creating our own dreams as opposed to inheriting our dreams from other people. And your book raises issues universal to all of us in a world in which not everyone is treated fairly. So I just wanted to ask you, Mimi, if I just say that if I just describe that the book intertwines two stories of emancipation from confining worlds, which at first glance seem quite separate, can you tell me, Mimi, what provoked you to write this book?
That's the most essential question. I love to get it, Allison, when I speak. First, I want to give a thanks and a shout out to the wonderful team at the JCC, Diane and Sarah and the rest of the group that were working on this amazing book month, and to the Vilna Shul for partnering with us. It looks like a wonderful physical place as well as a spiritual place, and I would love to check it out someday when, God willing, things are a little bit more open. So for me, the experience of discovering that my son, who at the time was only 2.5 when he first began to tell me that he was not, as we had assumed, a girl, which was his sex assigned at birth, but that he was in fact a boy. And as he began to take us on a very strange journey, something that I had never experienced or thought that I would experience in my life, of discovery, trying to figure out what we could do to help him, and finally landing on the word transgender with some help from people who were experts in the field. That journey felt to me almost like a haunting. And that's how I described it to my husband when I was writing. I had this opportunity to write the book. And I said, I feel like I would be telling only half the story if I talked about our experience with Jacob and his transition at the age of 4, a little bit over 4 years old. Because what was being thrown up from my past, the experience that I had living in ultra-orthodox Jewish, first Muncie, New York, then later Gateshead, England, I think the community that you're very familiar with, it felt like some of the struggles that I had been through, I was seeing mirrored in the kind of sadness and withdrawal that I was seeing in my son. So why was this different than other, childhood tantrums or whims or, play acting, which is what we first thought it was? As he rounded his 3rd birthday, he began to be more withdrawn, didn't look people in the eye. There seemed to be a pall of sadness that he carried with him everywhere. And when I told him that, you have the same physical features as your sisters, that means you are a girl, which at the time I assumed, not knowing better about gender identity. He said, why did God make me this way? Is God stupid? And that really cut into my heart. The fact that he felt that he had been assigned a role that quite clearly did not fit him. When I was a young girl growing up in this very ultra-orthodox community, and we can talk about some of the differences between our communities, I was told that there was one purpose for me in life, one tachlis, and that was to become a mother and a wife, and to enable my husband to learn Torah. And everything that I were to do up until that point was to bring me closer to that goal. And I was the one, as a young, intellectual, curious girl, who wanted to study the Torah in this instance. And it always irked me that all of my intellectual efforts were to go to providing the home to send my husband out to learn. I also was bothered by the fact that, you know, my dress, my clothes, the way I spoke to people had to remain modest in a way that meant I wasn't to interface with the world. I wasn't to look men in the eye. I was to make myself what it felt like smaller and less obtrusive. And that was the definition that I was given to the word modesty. And when I saw my son begin to decline and become sadder and more withdrawn, claiming all the time, I am a boy, you're wrong about me, to the point where he would throw these knockdown, drag out tantrums and fly off the handle for the smallest thing because someone had made, had referred to him as, oh, what a pretty girl. I realized that we needed to search for an answer. And my search for an answer as a young woman to emancipate myself from the community that I lived in, from the ideals of the community that I lived in, to find my own version of Judaism, to find my own version of womanhood, I felt it reflected in my ability as a mother to see what my son needed from me in his journey to an authentic identity, and vice versa in many ways, and we can talk about that later. He helped me draw a full circle and put to rest some of the unrest that I felt having gone through a journey in young adulthood that was so painful.
So all of the aspects of this story absolutely resonate with me, not because I've led the same life, but because I feel some sort of harmony with the story, with both stories equally, that intertwining of becoming aware that something in your life is not going according to everybody else's plans. I think I'll start with the earlier part of your life to begin with, and we'll come on to Jacob in just a few minutes. But I'm really interested to know that when you realized that you needed to live your own life and create your own dreams, you were going to have to leave the world you knew. But what I'd like to know is, how did you know anything about the world beyond those invisible walls? Because as I understand it, both from your book and from other experiences in life, you couldn't watch the television, there was no internet. What did you know about the world, and how did you find out that you wanted to leave?
That's a great question. In some ways, I was really lucky, and I know this experience is not mirrored by many people who are leaving the ultra-Orthodox community. My mother was not religious when she was growing up. So her formative years, she lived in a household with her parents who were assimilated New York Jews, as she describes them. And she went to college. She went to graduate school. I don't want to give away some of the secrets, but she from the book, but she dabbled in other faiths as well. And or more than doubled. And it wasn't until she reached her mid-30s, late 30s, that she turned to ultra-orthodoxy and became increasingly religious. And she had me at the age of 41, and it was only in my 5th or 6th year that I began to have to follow the strict rules of tzniut, of modesty. I had to get rid of my pants and my shorts and my short sleeves and dress completely covered. And we began to be very rigid about the rules of kashrut and Shabbat and the Sabbath and the dietary laws. And then from there moved to one of the most ultra-Orthodox enclaves in the USA, which is Muncie, New York. So we went straight up the path of extremity, I would say. But my mother still had a foot in both worlds, and I described this in the book. She had gotten her PhD in philosophy from Boston University when I was younger, and taught Plato and Aristotle and Kant and Thomas Aquinas, who was her favorite. And so in our house, in our books, we had all the rabbinical and the Talmudic books, and then we had the philosophers who any of the rabbis that I grew up studying from would call them heretics on the other bookshelf. And so my mother, in some ways, her whole life straddled both worlds. And so I did grow up with some knowledge, and I ended up rebelling against being in a very strict Beis Yaakov high school, Beth Jacob High School, and ended up in a more modern Orthodox high school for a period of 3 years, in which I had a little bit more exposure to the world. But when I went to seminary in England, it was like the world shut down around me again. And for the next 5 years, because post-seminary, I continued to live in England with my stepfamily. My mother remarried. For those 5 years, I felt like I lived in a hermetically sealed bubble. And I didn't have newspapers, and I didn't have access to the internet. The internet was a new thing anyway back then. And I didn't go to see movies. And it was the waking up and realizing that world was still there, and those ambitions that I had were still burning in my heart. That was one of the things that brought me to leave my community.
Wow, that is a different story from mine. My family was modern Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox. And I was actually just discussing this with my siblings last night. We talk to each other all the time. I'm from a very close family. I just don't live anywhere near them. They're all in London. And we were just talking last night about how lucky we are that despite the rather grey and cage-like feeling of having to go to synagogue every week and be in the choir, and nothing was allowed on Shabbat, and there was quite a lot of disapproval from the neighbours if we were caught sneaking a tennis racket down to the park on a Saturday afternoon. There was quite a lot of disapproval, but actually our parents were quite rather witty, and they had their own construction of Judaism, such that in the house we were lucky. We had the music and we had the traditions, but we had a kind of a sense of the ridiculous and a sense of humor. And it's really helped me to realize that although I had to go to Hebrew school all the time, and I know exactly what you mean by tachlis, that the duty to do something with your life, this incredibly strong necessity to always be doing the right thing, and to do important things and leave a ripple on the surface of the world, and how worthless you are if you don't. I understand that, but I feel that my cage door was wide open, so I could fly away. And as a result, I didn't need to fly away so often, because the rules didn't seem so, it just didn't seem so rigid for us. But what was the motivation for you to make the break?
For me, it was approaching the time of marriage, which, I had my first arranged marriage suggestion at the age of 16, which thankfully my mother said no to. There were girls in my class who got married at the age of 16. which in some ways feels really devastating now that I'm well past that age to realize how young that really is. But at the age of 18, 19, 20, it became, you know, you have a shelf life, as they used to call it derogatorily. So the purpose was I would finish seminary and get married. And it was the process of being viewed as, you know, as a commodity, you know, with a certain list of, you know, my attributes that in no way could cover the real me, my force, my life force, my energy, my joy, my ambitions. None of that was reflected on that piece of paper that the matchmaker had. In fact, I found that things like the fact that my mother came from a family without a rabbinical status seemed to matter more. The fact that my mother was not wealthy seemed to matter more.
You didn't have yichus.
Yes, I didn't have yichus. The fact that I asked too many questions in class, even though I was fascinated with my Talmudic studies and I you know, believed everything that I studied, but, you know, it made me a little dangerous. And knowing that no one could see me as the real me, having little faith in that system, but being told that that was the only way I could fulfill my life's purpose, it began to weigh on me very heavily. And I would say at that point, I began to feel a little helpless about my future. And in the middle of all this, I had a suggestion, an arranged marriage suggestion, a shidduch, as they call it. And it seemed, this young man seemed to be, okay, you know, a good enough match. You know, you would meet for 2 weeks. You wouldn't touch, you wouldn't hold hands, you wouldn't be seen, you wouldn't be alone. You'd have to be in a public place or in with your parents hovering outside the living room door that's open 3 inches. I agreed to marry this young man after 3 weeks of dating and going through all the matchmakers. Of course, we couldn't make arrangements ourselves. We're only 20, 21. And that ended up in a devastating, a broken engagement. And I talk about it in the book. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, but it was the final straw breaking. And I said, what is left for me here?
Right.
Am I the person I want to be? Is this what I dreamed of being when I was a little girl? And the answer was a resounding no.
Right. You had to leave.
Yeah.
I'm aware of the time and I really want to get on to Jacob, and yet I must ask you what it was like to relive this and your other story while you were writing this book. I feel like I must hear and acknowledge and feel what it was like for you while you had to go through that process of reliving all that you went through.
Well, the famous memoirist Mary Carr talks about writing memoir as an experience of drowning. And that is what it felt like to me at certain points. There were many things that I didn't remember about how I felt at certain points in my life, whether it was the temporary grief of feeling like I was losing a daughter, you know, the grief of the broken engagement when I was younger. And I had written a lot of diaries, and I had, you know, for my son's life, I'd had emails I'd written to people, texts, little notes I had jotted down for myself, and memories, and they all came flooding back. And I felt like I was back in those moments, and that enabled me to write the book with some emotional resonance, but it also took a lot out of me. There were days that I wrote the bulk of the book over a very long summer where my kids, God bless them, they were in day camp from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I would write during those hours. And sometimes I felt like I couldn't stop because I was so sucked into that memory and reliving and and almost cathartically getting those words out on paper. And it felt like this immense emotional process. And I would have to drag myself away and like look at my kids and talk about, you know, the latest Disney movie that we were going to see that evening, or what was for dinner, or how their day went. And it was an interesting experience to kind of live inside the book for eight or 9 hours, and then try to drag myself out, and to re-enter real life. So there were moments that were really painful, but in the end of the day, there was a huge sense of catharsis from writing this book. And I recommend it to anyone who has a story, has something about their life that they need to work out. Even if it never gets published, even if you wouldn't want it to be published, there is something remarkable about the process of writing about your life and looking back and realizing that your narrative is much more layered than you thought it was, and that there are truths that are there to uncover. And there were many truths that I uncovered through the process of writing, things that I hadn't quite seen that way until I went back.
Well, I want to thank you for writing it, because your truths and the effort that you went to and what you put into it was actually very healing for me. And I think it probably would be for other people as well, were they to read your stories. I've been able to come to terms a little bit more with some of my own issues. I suffer from a sort of long-standing sense of inadequacy over the way that I didn't realize that my daughter was transgender until she was 19. To be fair, she didn't tell us, and she was a very, very, very good actress. You'll know that from your work of advocacy with transgender children, that many people make a great effort to try to fit into their gender assigned at birth. And my God, she did a wonderful job of it. But when we finally realized what she'd gone through, it's taken me years and years to, I'm not sure I have really expunged it. I think I took a big knock of my own self-confidence, and at the same time as realizing that my dreams as a mother were going to be redirected at the time to literally keeping her alive. I mean, that hasn't, as it happens, she's done it all herself. And I mean, I take no credit. She has done everything.
I'm sure knowing you for the small amount of time that I have, that a lot of this is your love and your support. Because you are fierce. You are a fierce mother. We call us mama bears. You're a mama bear.
Yes.
I take one to know one.
Thank you. So Mimi, tell us about Jacob. I want to know, first of all, how did you know that Jacob wasn't going through a phase and wasn't a tomboy?
So at first I assumed he was. And to me, he was the middle of 3 daughters. So I just said, well, okay, he's a little different. He's quirky. He always was. He was always rough and tumble. I wish I had this picture with me to show everyone, but there's a picture of him, and he's got food all over his face, and he's got bruises from bumping into everything because he runs into everything, and he can't, and he's got his fists around something, and he's 2.5, 3 years old, and he's chubby, and his hair's all over the place, and there's snot on his face. And to me, like, his spirit, his energy was so rough and tumble that I just assumed, tomboy. I had been a bit of a tomboy until that had kind of been crushed out of me at a certain age, sadly. And that's what I assumed. So that was my first assumption. But the persistence of his claim to be a boy, the increasing sadness that didn't go away. It wasn't like losing your, an opportunity to go, to the park and someone throws a tantrum, or, or your favorite doll gets lost, and so you mourn it for a while. The sense of his retreat into himself, the sadness that grew by the day, the anger that he had at being called a girl, those things did not go away. Those things grew. So it was clearly different than a whim. And it wasn't until he was close to 3 years old, so this had been going on for 6 or 7 months, that we began to do some research. And at the time, I thought being transgender was just something that older people experienced. And you know, I didn't think enough about it to research it earlier in my life. So I just assumed it was something like a fetish or something like a, you know, it's like what you like to dress, or you feel more feminine, so, you know, you'll want to have long hair. I didn't understand that it was a deeply held sense of who you are, that it was your identity. And that's something that you couldn't take away from the person who feels that way, that no amount of therapy or talk or a parent who makes a child wear certain clothes to be more masculine or feminine, nothing can change who that child is. And it became clear after I began to research and discovered that, you know, children can be transgender. At the time, I didn't realize that children as young as my son could be transgender or could really know their gender identity. But the more I discovered and the more I learned and the more I reflected on my son's experience, that became clear as well. So it was very different. The protocol, what they used to say, therapists and you know, researchers and people who knew about what it meant to be transgender, they used to say persistent and consistent and insistent children, that they are different in their identity than their sex assigned at birth, are likely to, or could be transgender. Now they realize that insistent is not always the case, because unfortunately, sometimes a child gets such strong backlash from parents or community that they can stop talking about it. But that is usually what the understanding is of what it means to be a trans child. And that was the case for Jacob.
Thank you. So a child is insistent, consistent, and persistent. They're not pretending.
Not pretending, as my son would say frequently. He
Yes.
threw things around the room and threw himself into things. Yeah.
So we've already gotten quite a lot of questions, and I've got a lot too. And I think one of us needs to talk about what the word transgender means. Would you like to do that very quickly?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So gender identity is your deeply held understanding, your internal understanding, your brain's way of interpreting your gender. So it's different than, for example, what your reproductive organs are. That's your sex assigned at birth. So a doctor can look at a child at birth, look between the legs and say, okay, this is a male, this is a female, or perhaps this is an intersex baby, right? Someone whose genitalia are ambiguous in some way. But that doesn't, when a child grows up and around the age of 3 and 4, sometimes earlier, begins to have a sense of who they are in the world, when it comes to gender, when it comes to understanding whether you're a boy or a girl or a non-binary, meaning that neither of those labels quite fit, that is separate sometimes in the case of transgender people than what their doctor might have said about them given their birth and their reproductive organs that they could see from the outside, right? So your genitalia, for example, if your identity is different, then that would make you possibly transgender, right? And those things are different than sexual orientation, which is who you are attracted to. So being transgender doesn't mean you're gay.
No,
It's a totally separate pocket.
My understanding is that amongst the transgender and non-binary or gender diverse community, only about 12% of people are so-called straight. So it's a different thing altogether, sexuality. And I think it's fair to say that more and more we now realize that gender is a spectrum and it can evolve over time. I'd love to ask you about the unique challenges that face a transgender preschooler and what are the issues facing transgender children as they grow up.
So for my son, you know, at the age when he transitioned, which was 4 years old, for him, his concerns were, would his teachers and the director of our preschool use the right name and pronouns? If they had continued to call him by his birth name, which in the transgender community is sometimes called the dead name, a name that is dead to you, and if they continued to use she as a pronoun, he would have continued to be very hurt about that, and it would have felt very invalidating. In fact, in the months leading up to his transition, sometimes when someone called his name very loudly, his former name, I would see him flinch physically, as if he'd been hit in the face with something. That name did not reflect to him who he was. So for him, the names and the pronouns were important, and also being allowed to join. And unfortunately, in the lower grades, everyone gets separated into buckets of the girls are going to go to the bathroom and the boys are going to go to the bathroom. Things are changing, and we're, preschools are starting to say all the kids in the blue team or the white team will separate into groups, and that's much better. But for him to be not allowed to go with the boys and, do activities with the boys or being viewed and seen and spoken to as a boy would have been incredibly hurtful. So for us, that was important at that age. But transgender children today face a lot of hardship and a lot of challenges in this, especially in this environment of the last few years. There has been a spike in anti-transgender legislation. A lot of it has been aimed specifically at young people and their ability to access gender-affirming medical care. And some of it has been against transgender student athletes, that they should not be allowed to participate in sports. There's been also a lot of positive pro-equality legislation, but it has been a struggle, and the struggle has become very public. So very few people listening to this talk tonight will not have come across an opinion piece at some point speaking about transgender youth. Should they be supported? Are their parents crazy? I'm not crazy. And neither are you. Is being transgender a mental illness? No, it isn't. And that has made the environment for our kids really dangerous, because transgender youth, when they're not supported, when they're bullied relentlessly, which happens frequently especially in more hostile environments than the wonderful little bubble of Massachusetts that we live in. When they're bullied, they have very bad outcomes, mental health outcomes, and they have a very high rate of attempted suicide. And in the transgender community in total, that attempted suicide at least once in their life has risen to about 40-45%, which is really an unacceptable number, and especially an unacceptable number for a parent of a transgender child. My son is happy. My son is thriving. My son is aware of some of the challenges that face him, but I am building in him resilience. And from your story and what you've told me about your beautiful daughter, you have built resilience in her too. And she has created some of that for herself. And I feel like my kid, I feel so grateful that we live in the place we do and we have the support we do, but not every transgender child has that support. And so what we need is for the community at large, parents of not transgender kids, to talk to their kids about the gender spectrum and say, you're going to meet a transgender child in school one day. And what I want from you is to treat them as an equal, is to value their humanity. And I don't want to hear that you made fun of somebody, just like we do for any talk about diversity with our kids.
We need to normalize the fluidity of gender and understand that gender is not binary. I think exactly. The tyranny of the binary. The tyranny of the binary is something that we need to get away from in gender. We need to get away from it in race and religion as well. Just this polarizing of life and the binarification of everything, including gender, is something we must get away from. There are so many questions, and other people have them as well. I'm just, and I love all my questions. I wanted to ask you.
You, the audience, and then we'll go back to you if we have time.
Yeah, I think I know what some of people in the audience want. There is, and I think this is very important. That can you tell us what is at stake with the Equality Act, and how can we, the public, what tangible power do we have with our votes? Just if you can briefly say what the Equality Act, and then I think if necessary, I can briefly say what's at stake with the Affordable Care Act being discussed on November the 4th at the Supreme Court. But let's see if we can do that in your role as a national and international transgender children rights advocate and attorney.
In different states, there are different, right now, there are different laws that either protect or don't protect transgender people in employment, in housing. So for example, being able to buy a house or to rent an apartment, to not be discriminated against until turned away because of their presentation or who they are, in education, in healthcare. And so you could go from Massachusetts to, South Carolina and lose your rights as a transgender person. What the Equality Act seeks to do is to codify non-discrimination for transgender people based on gender identity, transgender and non-binary people, across the country, to make it a federal statute. And it has passed overwhelmingly in the House, and it is sitting in the graveyard in the Senate right now. So it is my hope that one day this piece of legislation will be taken up in the Senate and will be signed into law. And so my son can go to college, in Duke University, or he can go to college in Arkansas if he wants, and not have to worry that as soon as he crosses that border, his rights are taken away. He can be kicked out of a restaurant. He can be kicked out of a bus on a highway in the middle of the night because somebody doesn't like the way he looks, or doesn't like the way he speaks, or doesn't like the fact that he seems transgender. So that is really important. And so, every vote across this country for a, local official, for a federal official, for House, for Senate, especially because that's where the Equality Act is, and for president, is going to make a difference. And, we really hope, and I always say that it's not about politics, it's about people. And my son is a person, and the beautiful and brave transgender people and non-binary people I have had an opportunity to meet and befriend in my life, they're people. And so we're talking about their rights. I don't care at the end of the day, about political parties any more than I care, then it's because sometimes it's about the rights and who's voting and who's holding up rights and who isn't. And so for me, it's, pay attention to what legislators are proposing. Is it going to advance human rights for transgender people, or is it not?
Thank you. So our votes matter because there is legislation, as you have just...
You always are so succinct, and I'm so long-winded. I apologize to the audience, but I love it. Allison, you nailed it. You just brought it down to the essential. You boiled it down.
I want to tell you, or either hear from you, or maybe I might possibly be able to do this, to just note that on November the 4th, the Affordable Care Act is going to be discussed at the Supreme Court. And people like our children stand to, if the Affordable Care Act is turned over and tossed out and nothing put in to replace it, there are millions of people in this country who could lose their health insurance. And I wanted to point out that affirmation of gender is life-saving, and there's a bounty of excellent scientific evidence. Most of it actually has been accumulated and accrued since 2009, when my husband and I and my son first heard from my daughter that she was transgender, when we realized that that my daughter was going to need affirmation of her identified gender. We didn't even know what that even meant at the time. We now realize that that's affirmation of gender. At the moment, you're describing social affirmation of Jacob, and then later there are other things. There are all sorts of medical ramifications and legal ramifications, which you're now alluding to, things like changing someone's name on a passport or a driving license, and all the issues that you were alluding to with sports, many legal issues of affirmation, and they're all important and they save lives. The likelihood of mental anguish and even suicidality goes down dramatically with support of and facilitation of gender affirmation in all of those ways. So at the Supreme Court, if the Affordable Care Act's clause regarding the exclusion of people from insurance if they have pre-existing conditions, that is quite a risk for people who are transgender and non-binary, because if they're felt to have a so-called pre-existing condition, in these days it's called gender dysphoria, there is a great risk that people will lose their capacity to pay for the medical and occasionally surgical and psychosocial interventions that are so important and actually life-saving in the world of people with transgender and gender diversity.
Yeah,
my
that's a great
goodness,
point.
it is now 7:54, and
right,
let's see.
More questions.
There are so many more questions, definitely questions that would, if I had been given my druthers and we'd gone on all night, I would have been asking you about a sort of a rather more difficult question about how any remaining little wisps of Judaism and Jewish culture, anything philosophic or Talmudic that has stayed with you. I think I would just look at this box.
I see some questions from the audience about Judaism, about how does this work out with my parents?
Yes.
Are they sympathetic to my new life? And how has the religious community been or not been supportive? So I think that works into that question really well. I no longer have a lot of contact with the very ultra-orthodox Jewish communities I lived in. At this point, they're still not supportive of transgender people, and even in fact to the entire LGBTQ community. And I will make a distinction between some really heroic moves by some in the cusp of the Orthodox / ultra-Orthodox. And there's a rabbi in London that I'm thinking of specifically, and I've forgotten his name. And he wrote a piece about supporting gay students in transgender students as well in the Jewish day schools in England. And I thought that was really brave. And I know there are people in America that are doing that work too. But as far as the very ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic communities are concerned, that change has not really happened at an administrative or at a high level, in the rabbinical level. So I'm hoping that that will continue to happen. There is only so long that people can be denied their right to exist within a community. And I'm optimistic to some extent that things will begin to shift, whether it is because people will be leading these communities and finding more affirming Jewish communities, or whether there will have to be some reckoning within. Jacob is 10 years old, and my parents, yes, my mother is still a very big part of our lives, and she has been wonderful to my kids and accepts Jacob for who he is. But again, she straddles both worlds. So she has a transgender grandson that she adores, and she comes to our house frequently and visits. She's now living back in the US. But she still defends and believes in the tenets of her faith. That is the kind of struggle that she has had to deal with, and I can't make those choices for her. So Jacob is 10. Is there another question from the audience that we can take in the last 3 minutes? I'm going to squeeze it in.
I have another question if nobody else does. I'm never short of words.
Okay.
At this, I'd love to end this on an even higher note that we're already on in terms of optimism. I would love to make to celebrate the fact that Jacob is now advocating for himself. He himself is an advocate for transgender and gender diverse children. How does that make you feel?
Oh, I am Sheppy Nachas now. like nothing else. Oh, and this matches up with a question from the audience. What was Jacob's reaction to the publication of the book? So Jacob is a partner with me the entire time with the book. So he knew that I'd been offered an opportunity to write a book. He knew, we talked about it. He's given his permission. There was a few years where he just wanted it to be my side, my work, leave me out of it, Mom. In the beginning in 2015, we would lobby together in Massachusetts for the public accommodations law that was on the docket. And he came with me to places. And then there were a few years when he said, you know what, I just want to be left alone. But he was and continues to be proud of the work we do. And we've explained to him the place that what we're trying to attempt here, that there are many people who don't have the fortune that he has to be supported within our community and within our family, and that we are trying to show people that being transgender could be a wonderful thing, and it is perfectly normal. And now that he is at 9 years old was the first time, now he's 10, he said to me, Mom, I want to ask a question at this CNN town hall that we've been invited to through my work with HRC. And so he submitted a question to the town hall. It was a town hall for all the Democratic candidates at the time. It was last year. The only person who didn't come was Bernie Sanders because he was ill at the time, and I'm glad he's better. But he got to ask Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, a question about protecting transgender kids in school. And she did say that if she were elected, he would help vet the next Secretary of Education. So I'm kind of hoping that the next person who gets elected president can kind of honor grandfather in that promise. So we'll see. But he is invested in his advocacy now. I think he's really proud of it. And for me, that's empowerment. And that's all I want for him, is to feel empowered for who he is.
Yasha koach. I think that I think it's just a wonderful thing when we see our children who have gone through so much, when they are empowered and have their own voice. It shows you that love will overcome. I mean, we know this scientifically, but we know it in our hearts as well. If we are good people, this sort of goes back a little bit to my nerdy question that I never got. I love nerdy questions, and we'll have to do it over tea sometime.
From one nerd to thank you.
but my nerdy question had a lot to do with tachlis, the reason for life, the meaning for living, and tikkun olam, the healing of the world. And if we can, in advocating for our children, empower them and see them use their voices, we are, in fact, still using our Judaism. That is a Jewish thing. And I think it's something that we can still be proud of. However much we may have strayed a little bit away from the most fundamental part of Jew. I hope you don't mind me putting those words into your mouth. Very rude of me.
No, not at all. I think you quite well understand, and and I think that, and I talk about it a lot in the book. There's an aspect to the book where I delve into theology. Perhaps you could say I come up with my own theology, and that is that we are meant to evolve. We are meant to stray from the path and find our own path. And is there nothing more wonderful than, discovering your real purpose, and that is something that no one has charted out for you. In some ways, in contradiction to what we think of when we think about organized religion or historical religion. Perhaps we were each put here to break that mold and to live some authentic life that will bring us purpose and joy, and the world additional value, and bring good to the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we might be at the end. Is that right?
Oh my God.
Hi,
Go on,
I'm on.
Have any more time?
I think we covered the one question that came up a few times that we didn't cover is, how did Jacob's sisters handle everything and react to everything?
Yeah, so his younger sibling was so young when he transitioned, that she didn't really remember an older sister. And I talk about that in the book and get a little teary-eyed, because it was that moment when she said, you know, who's that? Was that someone in my dance class? I brought up the name, you know, that we had used. And it's that moment that I realized that Jacob was Jacob so seamlessly in our family that it didn't matter. Like it was no longer for her, there was no wound, there was no transition. For Jacob's older sibling, it was harder. They were very, very close, and as sisters, and it took a while for the kind of healing, and that sense of, oh, I got back something even better than what I thought I had temporarily lost because of my own perception of who my sibling had been. And so they're both doing very well. And, you know, we have the normal squabbles in our family, the normal ups and downs. Of course, during this time now, it could drive you crazy some days, but they're all doing well. Jacob is Jacob. He is just a joy and a light, and as are his siblings. And I'm a lucky mom. I'm a very lucky mom. And just love your kids for who they are, not who you expected them to be.
Thank you. So, I mean, the bottom line is, as parents, we just want our kids to be happy.
Yeah.
That's the number one priority that we try to make happen. So I realized I just popped up out of nowhere, as we tend to on Zoom. So I wanted to just introduce myself. I'm Sarah Ewing, and I work at the JCC, for any of you who don't know me. I know you all know me, but our viewers. So thank you so much, Mimi and Allison, for this amazing presentation, for your openness, for sharing such personal aspects of your lives, for working so well together. I hope we sort of somehow facilitated a new friendship between the two of you. I don't think you knew each other before. So it was just a joy to get to know both of you. And we're very grateful that you were so willing to speak to our community on such a sensitive and amazing topic. So please support Mimi by buying her book. Mimi, do you have a copy of your book behind you can hold up? You both do. Thank you. So the JCC is partnering with Copper Dog Books, which is a local bookstore in Beverly. You can go to our website and buy the book through them. That would be great way to support them and Mimi. So please do. It's an amazing read. You'll enjoy every minute of it. We still have an amazing lineup. We have many events still to go. I think we have 6 events. This might be halfway through our series. Our next event is on Sunday at 7 o'clock with Rachel Levin, who wrote the book. It's called, it's actually really funny. It's called Eat Something, a Wise Son's Cookbook for Jews who like food and food lovers who like Jews. And she worked with the deli owner of Wise Sons in San Francisco, and she'll be in conversation with Alon Munzer, who owns Mamala's Deli in Cambridge. So very different, but join us 7 o'clock on Sunday. You can buy tickets on the JCC website. It's right there. And thank you so much, all of you, for supporting our series. As a nonprofit, we rely heavily on your generosity and your support, and we are very grateful. If you're looking for another way to support us, we are running a raffle. We have a beautiful pair of diamond earrings to raffle off, and you can buy tickets on the website, and we'll be announcing the winner soon. So you can check that out on the website. They were generously donated by our friends at EB Horn. So please check that out. And I think that's it. Just thank you so much to both of you. This is where we would all applaud. Feels like very quiet right now, but everyone's applauding from home. And I hope I didn't forget to thank someone, but yeah, and thank you again to Lynn at the Vilna Shul for partnering with us as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a great night. Stay healthy, stay well, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Vote.
And good night to the ones in England.
Yes, go to sleep.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
late.
And hello from across the pond. Hello. Take care. Thank
Bye.
you. Good night.
Thank
you
you.
all.